the depths of ancient Greek myths, amidst the gentle echoes of days long past, a narrative begins, inviting us to delve into the quiet moments that often go unnoticed. Picture the day's hustle and bustle gradually subsiding, as the mind immerses itself in tales where gods once walked the earth alongside mortals, where heroes faced insurmountable trials, and ordinary people lived their lives under the benevolent Mediterranean sun. This journey will not be dedicated to grand battles, but rather to the serene instances that history typically overlooks: anticipation, labour, and profound contemplation. One can almost tangibly feel the weight of the chains being forged in the most hidden depths, in workshops where not a single ray of sunlight penetrates. There, in eternal darkness, the Cyclopes toil. Their mighty hands, with astonishing precision, shape the links of metal destined to shackle the most dangerous creature ever to appear in the world. But before delving into this climactic moment, it is worth returning to the origins when the earth itself was engulfed in righteous fury. Gaia, the ancient Mother Earth, was weary, witnessing the suffering of her children. The Titans, her giant firstborn, had been cast into the deepest abyss of the underworld by Zeus and his brothers. For long years Gaia felt their pain, resonating within her very essence. Every clap of Zeus's thunder seemed a mockery to her, every lightning bolt a bitter reminder of what he had done to her family. And so she decided to create something new, something that could challenge the king of the gods himself. In the deepest caves where the earth's heat spawned lakes of molten rock, Gaia began her creation. She mixed earth and fire, rage and power, crafting a being so terrible that even she wondered if she had gone too far. This creature would be named Typhon, and he would have no equal. Imagine a giant so tall his head touched the stars. His arms could stretch from one end of the Mediterranean to the other. Instead of fingers, he had serpent heads that hissed and snapped, each guided by its own wrathful mind. His eyes glowed like the fiery coals of a forge, and when he spoke, his voice roared like 100 volcanoes erupting at once. However, it is precisely these details that make his story so fitting for a quiet evening. Much of Typhon's existence was not filled with epic battles. Primarily, he simply existed. He grew, he waited, he learned to understand what it meant to be in a world that suddenly seemed very small. For when Typhon first emerged from the earth, he did not immediately rush to fight Zeus. For days on end, he merely looked around. Imagine how strange that must have been for him, to see the sky for the first time, to feel the wind, the actual moving air on his colossal body, the sensation of sunlight warming his stony skin. He moved slowly across the land, and with each step mountains crumbled, not because he sought to destroy them, but simply because he was so immense that the earth could not adequately bear his weight. Villages emptied as people for miles around felt the earth tremble. But Typhon barely noticed these tiny settlements. He looked upward, studying the home of the gods. Mount Olympus towered in the distance, and even from afar Typhon sensed the power emanating from it. He smelled the ambrosia, heard the faint sounds of divine laughter, felt the electricity that always surrounded Zeus, and slowly, quietly, his purpose became clear. An interesting feature of monsters in Greek myths is that they are often not evil in the way we might expect. Typhon was not filled with malice or hatred for its own sake. He was filled with purpose. His mother created him for one specific task: to challenge the order established by Zeus, to ask the question that no one else dared to ask: who decided that you should rule everything? So Typhon began his slow journey to Olympus. But first he needed to test his strength. He started small, breathing fire onto forests and watching them ignite, dipping his serpent fingers into the sea and boiling the water, letting out a quiet growl, what he considered a quiet growl, and listening as his voice echoed across 3 mountain ranges. The gods, of course, noticed him immediately. It was impossible for a creature the size of a mountain to roam around without attracting attention. But their first reaction was not to attack. It was to observe and to wait. Zeus stood on his balcony, gazing at this new threat. And for the first time in centuries, he felt something he had almost forgotten: uncertainty. Not fear, but rather an awareness that this battle would be different from all others. Hera stood beside him, unusually quiet. Even she, who had opposed Zeus in countless intrigues and conspiracies, saw that Typhon represented something more than their usual family drama. It was not about who would sit on which throne. It was about whether their world would exist at all. The other gods began to prepare, not for battle yet. First, they prepared for retreat. And this is where the story becomes almost comical. In a way, these mighty, immortal beings who ruled every aspect of life on earth packed their things and fled to Egypt. They disguised themselves as animals and hid. Apollo became a raven. Artemis transformed into a cat. Hermes became an ibis, probably because he thought it looked dignified. Even the god of war himself turned into a fish and swam away as fast as he could. But Zeus could not run. Not because he was braver than the others, but because he was king. Kings cannot abandon their kingdoms, even when their kingdoms are in the sky. And their enemy is a giant with serpent fingers who can boil the sea with his breath. So Zeus stood his ground and waited. The battle, when it finally occurred, shook the entire world. But before speaking of the battle, it is worth discussing the preparation. Because preparation, as is known, is often more interesting than the event itself. Zeus prepared for 3 days. He polished his lightning bolts, sharpened his thunder, and practiced his aim. He ate carefully, choosing foods that would give him strength without making him heavy. He slept a long, peaceful sleep, accumulating energy for what he knew would be the longest battle of his immortal life. Typhon, meanwhile, also prepared, but in his own way he sat by the ocean, dipping his serpent fingers into the water, allowing them to acclimate to the sensation of movement in liquid. He practiced his roar, starting softly and gradually increasing the volume until sea creatures fled to the deepest trenches. He tested his fiery breath on uninhabited islands, learning to control temperature and direction. Both knew that this battle would determine the future of everything. If Zeus won, the order he established would endure. The gods would rule from Olympus, mortals would live their lives below, and the natural laws governing the universe would remain stable. If Typhon won, chaos would return. Not necessarily evil chaos, but the kind of chaos that existed before Zeus and his brothers organized the world into neat, predictable categories. A chaos where anything could happen, where natural laws were more suggestions, where mortals, gods, and monsters shared the same uncertain world. The battle itself lasted 7 days. 7 days of lightning visible from every corner of the earth. 7 days of roars that triggered avalanches in mountain ranges hundreds of miles away. 7 days the earth shook so violently that new islands rose from the sea and old ones sank beneath the waves. But what is interesting about this battle is not the dramatic moments. It is the quiet moments in between, the brief pauses when both fighters stopped to catch their breath, the way Zeus looked at the scorched earth and wondered what they were truly fighting for, the way Typhon looked at the stars and remembered that his mother had created him from the same earth as those distant fires. On the 7th day, Zeus managed to strike the perfect blow. His largest lightning bolt hit Typhon squarely in the chest, and the gigantic creature collapsed. But Zeus did not celebrate. Instead, he stood quietly, looking at his defeated foe, and felt something unexpected: sadness. Typhon was not dead. Gods and monsters do not die easily in Greek myths, but he was vanquished. And as Zeus summoned those special chains mentioned at the beginning, he realized that victory and triumph are not always the same thing. The Cyclopes brought their masterfully crafted chains, forged from metal that came from the heart of dying stars, cooled by the tears of the earth itself, blessed by forces more ancient than any of the gods. These chains would hold not only Typhon's body, they would contain his very essence, his ability to challenge the established order. As they wrapped the chains around Typhon's massive form, the giant spoke for the first time since the battle began. His voice was now quiet, a barely audible whisper compared to his former roars. "This is not the end," he said, and Zeus nodded. "I know," Zeus replied, because both of them understood what the other gods, hiding in Egypt, had not yet realized. The chains could hold Typhon's body, but they could not hold the question he represented, a question that would echo through every generation of gods and mortals to come. Who decided that everything should be this way? The colossal Typhon was committed to the earth buried deep beneath the mass of Mount Etna. Since then, this mountain peak has transformed into a raging volcano, whose fiery breath erupts whenever the mighty giant restlessly stirs in his eternal sleep. Even after millennia, when Etna awakens from its dormancy, spewing streams of lava and ash, a belief persists among people that it is Typhon, in his dreams yearning for freedom, testing the ancient forged chains that hold him in the earth's depths. Meanwhile, Zeus returned to his majestic abode on Olympus, and the other gods, having left their temporary refuge in Egypt, resumed their customary way of life, as if there had been no recent upheaval. However, the supreme god, often standing thoughtfully on his high balcony, would gaze at the distant shimmering glow of Etna. His thoughts would invariably turn to the unsettling question: what would happen when these mighty, yet susceptible to wear and tear, chains finally lost their strength? And even in the quiet of one's room, as a person sinks into deep repose, a similar question might arise. What will happen when that force that challenges all established norms finally achieves complete freedom? What will be the consequences when that question, which no one dares to voice, finally rings out for all to hear? Scarcely had the chains that bound Typhon cooled from the forge's heat, when the earth trembled again. However, this time it was not the monolithic movement of a single colossal being. This time a multitude of footsteps could be heard, the sound of countless strides that seemed to move inexorably in a single, predetermined direction. Gaia having lost her mighty protector in Typhon, by no means abandoned her claims against Zeus and all his divine lineage. If one monster failed to challenge the Olympians' power, then perhaps an entire army would succeed. And so, delving into the deepest recesses of her fertile valleys, she began to create a new generation of offspring, the giants. These beings were entirely different from Typhon, born of fury and flame. The new giants were born of deep patience and unwavering resolve. Their growth was unhurried, like ancient trees whose crowns reach their full height only after decades. And throughout this long period of maturation, they tirelessly accumulated knowledge and experience. Observing Typhon's defeat, Gaia learned something profoundly important. She realized that brute force alone was insufficient to challenge the mighty gods. Her new children required a well-thought-out strategy, coordinated cooperation, and, most critically, sufficient time. Thus the giants dedicated their period of maturation, which lasted approximately half a century, to meticulously studying their future adversaries. Hiding in secluded valleys, they ceaselessly observed the Olympian gods, scrupulously noting their habits, identifying strengths and vulnerabilities. They discovered that Zeus reached the peak of his power during thunderstorms but became more vulnerable in clear, serene weather. They also found that Poseidon lost his strength the further he moved from any body of water. It was noted that Hades rarely left his underworld dominion, making his actions quite predictable. The giants acted with such striking methodicalness that their very nature made them ideal characters for a story requiring careful and unhurried narration. They knew no haste. Their planning, preparation, and practice were carried out with the same unwavering determination with which a person might approach a long and extraordinarily complex project. At their head stood Alcyoneus, a giant endowed with a very unusual ability. He became immortal as long as he remained on the land where he was born. This meant he could never leave his native valley to directly participate in battles. However, this same quality allowed him to coordinate the entire war from an absolutely safe position. It's worth pausing for a moment to consider this paradox. The leader of a great rebellion against the Olympian gods was, in essence, chained to his own native corner. He had the ability to send messages, devise grand plans, and give orders, but he himself could not take part in any of the battles he so meticulously organized. In this situation there is something both tragic and comical, a kind of irony of fate. Another giant, the unfortunate Porphyrion, struck by Hera's beauty when he saw her from afar, fell madly in love. His entire motivation for joining the war was not so much to challenge Zeus's supreme authority. He simply yearned to attract Hera's attention. Undoubtedly, attempting to impress someone by waging war against her husband could hardly be considered the most reasonable and well-thought-out approach. However, giants, as is known, were not distinguished by a high level of emotional intelligence. The giant brothers Ephialtes and Otus pursued an even more specific goal. Their plan was to kidnap Artemis and Aphrodite, making them their wives. The brothers' plan involved building a mountain high enough to reach the Olympians' abode by piling 3 different peaks, one on top of the other. For years they moved stones one by one, creating, in essence, the most ambitious landscape project ever seen in the world. The slowness of their labor was almost meditative, inducing a kind of trance-like state. Day after day the 2 brothers awoke before the first rays of dawn, ate a modest breakfast of bread and honey, and then spent 14 hours tirelessly dragging stones up the mountainside. During these arduous work sessions, they exchanged almost no words, communicating primarily through grunts and expressive gestures. In the evenings, they would sit by a fire, contemplating the towering mountain and make minor adjustments to their grand plans. Perhaps the peak should be a little to the left, Ephialtes might say. Otus would nod in agreement, and the next day they would shift their entire colossal project slightly to the west. It took them a full 3 years to build their mountain staircase, and by the time they finished the work, the brothers had almost forgotten why they were building it in the first place. The work itself, the process, had become far more important to them than the original goal. Meanwhile, the Olympian gods observed all this tumultuous activity of the giants with steadily increasing alarm. It was one thing to confront a single enemy, even one as powerful as Typhon. It was quite another to face an entire coordinated army that had meticulously planned its attack for decades. Zeus called a family meeting, which, as always with the Greek gods, portended many bitter arguments, mutual accusations, and dramatic gestures. Hera, wasting no time, accused Zeus of spawning this entire threatening situation, reminding him of the overthrow of the Titans. Poseidon, in his usual manner, proposed a radical solution: simply flood the entire earth and start anew with new mortals who, perhaps, would prove more grateful. Athena, always distinguished by practicality and insight, pointed out that before devising how to stop the giants, it was necessary to understand what they actually wanted. What if we just grant them a little divine status? Apollo suggested, attempting to find a compromise. A few small islands to rule, perhaps some authority over certain types of weather. Absolutely not, Zeus categorically replied. If we start negotiating with rebels, then every monster and minor deity in the world will decide they can make their own demands. Hermes, who had been unusually silent throughout the discussion, finally broke it. I have been observing them, he said. They are not like Typhon. They do not seek total destruction. They simply want respect. I think they crave recognition. Hermes' astute observation led to a long, profound silence among the Olympians. For respect was something the gods very rarely bestowed upon anyone outside their immediate family circle. The very thought that these giants might possess legitimate claims proved far more unsettling than the notion of them as mere monsters driven by a thirst for destruction. However, before the gods could find any diplomatic solution, war erupted. It began almost by accident. By a turn of events, Hermes, delivering a message to a mortal king, flew too close to the main giant encampment. One of the younger giants, exhilarated by the chance to finally see a god up close, threw a boulder at him. This was not necessarily an attempt to cause harm, but rather a gesture, similar to a child throwing a ball to get someone's attention. The boulder missed Hermes, but, unfortunately, destroyed a temple dedicated to Zeus that stood on a neighboring hill. Zeus, seeing this destruction, immediately assumed it was a deliberate attack, and responded with a powerful lightning bolt that singed the hair of 3 different giants. Thus, by chance and misunderstanding, the Great War began. But this war was radically different from the short, fierce, and intense battle with Typhon. It was a slow, grueling conflict that stretched on for many years. The giants possessed an undeniable advantage in their colossal size and brute strength, whereas the gods surpassed them in mobility and the art of magic. Neither side could achieve a decisive victory, and the battle turned into a protracted standoff. For weeks, the giants meticulously set enormous boulders, preparing for a coordinated attack on Olympus. The gods responded by sending fierce storms that made it impossible for the giants to see their targets and fight effectively. The giants then retreated into their vast caves to weather the storms. The gods, in turn, used this lull to repair any damage and meticulously plan their next move. Months passed without any major decisive battles. There were only small skirmishes, brief clashes, and long periods of agonizing waiting. During one of these relatively calm periods, something quite remarkable occurred. Demeter, the goddess of harvest, while travelling through one of the valleys, quite by chance stumbled upon a group of young giants. They were not preparing for war, nor were they training with weapons. Instead, they were diligently tending a garden, growing vegetables. Demeter, whose divine purpose was to foster the growth of all living things, was utterly fascinated by their innovative methods. The giants had developed a unique composting system that allowed them to create incredibly fertile soil. They had bred new varieties of beans capable of growing, even in rocky ground. Moreover, they had managed to cultivate wild grapevines to yield fruits twice the usual size. Before she fully realized her actions, Demeter began offering advice. "If you plant these carrots a little deeper, they will grow straighter," she remarked to a giant who was probably young enough to be considered her great-great-grandson, if gods and giants kept track of kinship as mortals do. "Really?" the giant asked with genuine curiosity in his voice, and this sincere surprise made Demeter momentarily forget that they were, in essence, enemies. She spent the latter half of the day enthusiastically teaching them the principles of crop rotation, the intricacies of determining soil pH levels, and the optimal lunar phases for planting various types of seeds. The giants listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and in gratitude for the knowledge received, offered her some of their simple bread and cheese. For Demeter, it was the most peaceful and serene day she had experienced since the war began. But when she returned to Olympus and recounted her unusual encounter to the other gods, Zeus was furious. "You fraternize with the enemy," he accused her. "They are gardeners," Demeter calmly replied. "They grow food. How does that make them my enemies?" The protracted conflict between the Olympians and the giants revealed an inconvenient truth to the deities, one none of them wished to accept. Deep down, they could not confidently answer the question of what truly motivated them to this bloody struggle. The colossal beings known as giants sought recognition of their dignity and respect from the ruling pantheon. The gods, in turn, yearned to retain the reins of absolute power. However, what exactly this power entailed, and why the universe could not accommodate both mighty gods and majestic giants, remained unclear. Alas, armed confrontations possess their own powerful inertia, sweeping them along even when the participants in these clashes begin to harbour deep doubts about the initial righteousness and expediency of their actions. Conflicts often drag on and continue not because their objective is clear and indisputable, but because their conclusion requires a far greater measure of true courage than merely continuing the fight. Ultimately, the grand confrontation ended not through an epic, decisive battle, but thanks to an ancient prophecy. An oracle, through whose mouth fate spoke, foretold that victory over the giants would only be possible if a mortal warrior stood shoulder to shoulder with the giants, shoulder with the Olympian gods. This revelation placed a difficult task before Zeus, to find a human hero whose valor and fearlessness would be sufficient to confront colossal adversaries whose size sometimes rivaled mountain peaks. His choice fell upon Heracles, a demigod, whose exceptional bravery had already been proven countless times in numerous feats and heroic journeys. However, even with the participation of Heracles, whose mighty figure fought alongside the deities, the final triumphant victory proved far less spectacular and dramatic than one might imagine. The giants fell one after another, vanquished in a series of localized, sometimes unexpected clashes. Thus Alcyoneus was cleverly lured from his native valley, where, according to tradition, he lost his bestowed immortality. The mighty Porphyrion fell under the combined blows of Zeus and Heracles, acting as a single unit, and the giant brothers Ephialtes and Otus met their demise at the hands of Artemis, not due to an attempt to kidnap her, but for an accidental yet unforgivable destruction of one of her sacred groves during the construction of their own colossal mountain. The war ended surprisingly quietly, almost anticlimactically, without fanfare or grand final chords. The surviving giants, having reconciled themselves to the circumstances, retreated into solitude, hiding on distant islands and in dark, deep caves where, as myths say, they remain to this day. Some narratives claim that after this they no longer attempted open rebellion against the Olympian gods, yet never fully reconciled themselves to their defeat, retaining a shadow of their former pride in their hearts. Zeus, the Thunderer, solemnly declared victory, and once again ascended his throne to rule the world. However, in the very essence of things, subtle yet profound changes had occurred. The Olympian gods no longer felt their former, unwavering confidence in the stability of their power. They had learned a harsh truth: dominion founded solely on brute force always remains vulnerable, and can be challenged by one who proves stronger, or more determined, or perhaps simply more patient in achieving their goals. And in rare quiet moments that occurred between thunderclaps and flashes of lightning, when Zeus stood alone on his celestial balcony gazing at the world below, he was overcome with reflection. He sometimes wondered if Demeter had been right in her judgments. Perhaps the giants were not irreconcilable enemies at all, but merely others, different from the Olympians, but not necessarily hostile. Reflecting on these events, one can imagine the gardens that those young giants diligently tended. Somewhere in one of the hidden valleys, tomatoes and carrots may still grow in soil richly nourished by ancient composting methods, and perhaps it is in this quiet, creative act that a far more enduring and significant victory lies than in any, even the grandest, battle. Deep beneath Mount Olympus, where the very rock glows with a crimson light from the unquenchable heat that has burned since the world's creation, lies a workshop that never knows rest. The incessant clang of hammers echoes through vast halls carved directly into the living stone, and the air trembles and shimmers with unimaginable heat, creating the sensation that everything around is submerged in mysterious underwater depths. It is here, in this fiery heart of Olympus, that Hephaestus tirelessly toils. His narrative, however, begins not in the thunderous battles and heroic deeds previously discussed, but in something far more peaceful, deeply personal, and human. It stems from a simple yet powerful inner need the need to create something truly beautiful. Hephaestus, revered as the most skilled smith among the gods, was simultaneously their outcast. At the moment of his birth, his mother, the great Hera, cast her gaze upon him and experienced deep disappointment. The infant possessed neither Apollo's dazzling beauty, nor Ares' mighty strength, nor Athena's perceptive wisdom. He was small in stature, his legs seemed weak and crooked, and his face, it seemed, was made more for squinting at the forge's flame than for amiable smiles at lavish Olympian receptions. Therefore, Hera committed an act that still seems unfathomable to the human mind and even to divine understanding. She mercilessly flung her own newborn son from the majestic heights of Mount Olympus. One can imagine the infant tumbling, plummeting for an entire day through fluffy clouds and past swift birds, watching the world below relentlessly expand, until finally he plunged into the boundless ocean near a small island known as Lemnos. And there, helpless and abandoned, he was rescued by merciful sea nymphs, who gently carried him to their secret underwater caves and tenderly cared for him as if he were their own child. The sea nymphs, Thetis and Eurynome, who took him under their care, were not at all troubled by Hephaestus's lack of outward beauty. For them, his inner qualities were far more valuable: a curious mind, inexhaustible inquisitiveness, and astonishing, incredible determination, which manifested in him from his earliest years. While other children indulged in carefree games, young Hephaestus eagerly immersed himself in studying the world around him. He explored the intricate structure of seashells, carefully examined the exquisite patterns in corals, and curiously investigated how crabs managed to regrow new claws to replace lost ones, comprehending the mysteries of nature. By the age of 10, he had already built his first forge, using volcanic rocks and driftwood for its construction. Despite its unassuming, even plain appearance, it functioned flawlessly. He mastered the art of controlling fire, not through sorcery or divine power, but through painstaking, meticulous observation and endlessly patient practice. Hephaestus discovered which types of seaweed, when dried and burned, could produce the hottest and most sustained flame. He also invented a way to use natural tidal pools as ideal cooling baths for hot metal, demonstrating an innovative approach. The sea nymphs could silently watch his laborious work for hours, mesmerized by the process. In the monotonous, yet confident rhythm of his hammer, there was something truly hypnotic. His ability to look at an ordinary piece of raw metal and already envision, see within it, the perfect finished tool was astonishing. His craft demanded such depth of concentration that it was, by its very nature, akin to deep meditation, a complete immersion in the creative process. When Hephaestus turned 16, he created something truly extraordinary that fundamentally changed the course of his destiny and that of the other gods. It was a golden throne, so strikingly beautiful that it seemed capable of capturing and forever holding the radiance of sunlight itself within its curves. The surface of the throne was entirely covered with incredibly intricate patterns that seemed to come alive and move when viewed from a different angle. One could discern flowers as if blooming and closing again, birds as if spreading their feathers in flight, and even waves, looking so realistic that they seemed to truly flow and shimmer. He sent this masterpiece to Olympus, addressing it to his mother as a gift. Hera was ecstatic when this mysterious gift arrived in her chambers. She had no idea who its sender might be, but she couldn't resist the temptation to sit down and examine this wondrous work of art more closely. The throne was so comfortable and so perfectly designed to her exact height and preferences that she gladly settled onto it, anticipating a long and luxurious rest. It was at that moment that she discovered the hidden trap. The throne was ingeniously constructed using invisible golden chains that activated the moment anyone sat on it. And the harder Hera struggled to free herself, the tighter and stronger these chains became, mercilessly binding her. Thus she found herself trapped, a prisoner of the most exquisite and beautiful piece of furniture ever created. The other gods tried every conceivable method to free the captive goddess. Zeus, the thunderer, unleashed his mighty lightning bolt upon the throne, but the chains merely absorbed the electrical discharge, using it to gain even greater strength. Poseidon, lord of the seas, flooded the entire throne room, yet the water simply flowed harmlessly around Hera, in no way affecting the golden fetters. Ares, the god of war, attempted to sever the chains with his sharp sword, but its blade shattered upon impact. In the end, Hermes, messenger of the gods, inspected the mysterious throne more closely and found a barely visible inscription at its base. The words read, "Made by Hephaestus, son of Hera, with love and respect," revealing the name of the skilled craftsman. Zeus immediately dispatched his messengers to find this mysterious master. And when the envoys discovered him in his secluded island workshop, they beheld a sight that deeply captivated their imagination. For many years, Hephaestus had been building his forge, which was not merely a workspace but also a kind of art gallery and an advanced engineering laboratory. Its walls were hung with tools that seemed to possess their own minds and self-organized, hammers hung in perfect order, sorted by size. Chisels invariably maintained sharp blades, never needing sharpening. Tongs automatically adjusted their grip to the shape and size of the object held. The anvil was forged from a solid fragment of meteoric iron, fallen from the depths of space, and with each strike it emitted wonderfully pure, perfect musical tones. However, the most striking and impressive element of the workshop was not its high-tech equipment. It was the boundless patience that was clearly evident in every project created. Hephaestus could work on some of his pieces for decades, adding minute details year after year, tirelessly improving and perfecting them with that exceptional dedication born only from a genuine and deep love for his craft. Among other curiosities, one could see a set of wind chimes crafted from metals so incredibly fine that it seemed almost transparent, and tuned to play melodies that changed with the weather conditions. Nearby was a mirror that reflected not the current appearance of the viewer, but showed how the person would look if they were perfectly healthy and completely happy. And there was a lamp burning requiring no fuel, its flame nourished solely by the master's own deep satisfaction from his meticulous work. The messengers found Hephaestus in the midst of his usual daily routine. As he had for years, he awoke long before dawn and began his day by meticulously cleaning his tools. He did this not because they were dirty, but because this quiet, repetitive action helped him to focus his thoughts and prepare for the work ahead. His breakfast was simple: bread, cheese, fruit, and water. During the meal, he carefully studied the blueprints he had created the previous evening. These blueprints were not diagrams in the modern sense, rather, they were a kind of poetry written in the language of metal and fire. In them, curves suggested new possibilities, angles implied potential strength, and dimensions hinted at achieving perfect balance. After breakfast, he lit his forge and spent several minutes in silent contemplation of the flame. He did nothing, merely observed the movement of the fire, the shades it created, the sounds it made as it consumed different types of fuel. This daily meditation revealed to him such profound secrets of fire that most other gods, despite their incomparably greater power, never learned. When the messengers explained the purpose of their visit, Hephaestus nodded thoughtfully. "She wishes to be freed from the throne," he calmly inquired. "Yes, exactly so," the envoys confirmed. "Zeus commands you to grant her freedom immediately." Hephaestus smiled, not with malice or triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose carefully laid plan had worked exactly as intended. "I will free her," he said, "but first I wish to visit Mount Olympus. I want to see my family." The messengers were forced to agree to these terms, though they were unsure Zeus would be pleased with such a turn of events. When the great assembly returned to Olympus, accompanying Hephaestus, the Olympian gods were astonished by what they saw. They had, of course, expected to see either a terrible monster or a humble supplicant begging for mercy. Instead, before their eyes stood a calm, dignified master who surveyed their majestic halls with the discerning gaze of a connoisseur evaluating the quality of work. "The architecture is certainly interesting," Hephaestus remarked, carefully examining the golden columns that supported the throne room ceiling. "But I would note that the joints could be strengthened, and the proportions are somewhat off. For ideal acoustic balance, the ceiling should be raised by 3 feet, or conversely, lowered by 5 feet. He then approached Hera, who was still trapped in her golden throne, futilely trying to free herself from the invisible chains. "Greetings, mother," he said softly. Hera looked at him, and it was the first time she had truly seen him since his birth. Her gaze noticed the burns on his hands, the marks of years of working with hot metal. She saw how his shoulders had developed and strengthened from countless blows with a heavy hammer. In his eyes she read intelligence and incredible patience, as well as something utterly unexpected: forgiveness. "I crafted this throne to perfectly suit your figure and a majesty," Hephaestus explained. "For months I studied you from afar, memorizing your exact measurements, your preferences, your habits. My goal was to create something that would allow you to feel like the true queen you undoubtedly are." Hera's anger gradually began to fade, replaced first by confusion, and then slowly but surely by shame. "The chains were necessary," Hephaestus continued, "because I understood that you would never sit still long enough to hear what I had to say if you had a choice." He touched a hidden lever in the armrest of the throne, and the golden chains instantly dissolved, like morning mist. "I do not seek revenge," he declared. "I desire recognition. I want to be a full part of this family, not as the son you rejected, but as the master capable of creating the tools you need." Zeus, who had been preparing to deliver some grand judgment, was left speechless. He had expected drama, a fierce confrontation, a display of divine justice. Instead, he witnessed something far more profound and complex: a family that was just beginning to learn how to be a family. Hera slowly rose from the throne, testing her newfound freedom. Then she performed an act that surprised everyone, including herself. She embraced her son. "I am sorry," she whispered. And those two simple words changed absolutely everything. From that momentous day, Hephaestus was officially recognized as the chief craftsman of Olympus. However, he did not move his workshop to the mountain itself. Instead, he significantly expanded his island forge and connected it to Olympus with a complex system of tunnels that he carved himself. Working in silence for many months, carving through solid rock, these tunnels soon became legendary among all the gods. They were perfectly straight, precisely sized for comfortable passage, and illuminated by a special kind of eternal flame that Hephaestus had invented specifically for this massive project. The tunnel walls were smooth as polished glass, yet never became slippery. The air inside always remained fresh, despite the underground location, thanks to an ingeniously designed ventilation system so complex that no one else could grasp its principles of operation. In his significantly expanded workshop, Hephaestus began to create tools and weapons that would define an entire era of the gods. It was here that Zeus's thunderbolts were forged, each individually crafted and meticulously balanced for maximum precision. Poseidon's trident was forged from metal consecrated by seawater from 7 different oceans. Artemis's silver bow was created from moonbeams that were somehow made solid without losing their inherent flexibility. But Hephaestus also created more humble, yet no less important things. Kitchen utensils for Demeter, which helped food cook evenly and stay fresh longer. Musical instruments for Apollo, producing sounds of impossible beauty. Garden tools that helped plants grow stronger and hardier. He also created golden robots who served as his faithful assistants. These mechanical beings could think and feel, but were perfectly content to spend their existence helping in the forge. These robots were not slaves. They were colleagues who simply happened to be made of metal rather than flesh. Every item that emerged from Hephaestus's forge was flawless, but not in the cold, impeccable sense one might expect. They were perfect because they precisely matched their purpose. Crafted with such a deep understanding of their users' needs, they seemed to anticipate what was desired before it was even asked for. And throughout all this work, Hephaestus maintained the same quiet, measured daily routine he had developed as a young outcast on his island. He awoke before dawn, meticulously cleaned his tools, ate a simple breakfast, and spent time observing the flame before beginning the day's work. The gods quickly learned that when they needed something truly important created, they did not simply place an order with Hephaestus and expect immediate results. Instead, they visited his workshop, discussed their needs in detail, and then patiently waited while he considered, planned, and with the utmost care, created exactly what they required. And as one falls asleep tonight, one can imagine the sound of that distant hammer striking still echoing through the tunnels beneath Olympus. Somewhere in the darkness, Hephaestus still toils, still creates, still transforms raw materials into objects of incredible beauty and practical utility, with the same patient dedication he acquired in childhood when he fell from the heavens and found his true calling in the depths of the earth. While Hephaestus expertly forged gold into unimaginable forms in his divine smithy, far below, on the sun-drenched hills of Greece, a completely different kind of work was underway. This work required neither magic nor divine power, only the steady rhythm of human hands doing what human hands had done since time immemorial, coaxing life from the earth. Allow me to introduce Alexios, though his name will never be immortalized in history. He was a farmer in Attica, the region surrounding Athens, during an era when gods still openly roamed among mortals. His story is found in no epic poem, on no temple wall, but it is precisely these kinds of stories that actually built the world in which heroes could exist. Alexios owned 12 acres of land that his grandfather had once reclaimed from a hillside, overgrown with wild olive trees. The soil there was thin and stony, the kind that made you appreciate every plant that managed to take root and grow. His home was small, 2 rooms built of local stone, with a roof of clay tiles he'd fashioned himself during long, hot summer months. Every morning Alexios awoke before dawn, not because he set an alarm, but because 40 years of farming had trained his body to recognize the precise moment when the sky began to change from black to deep blue. This was the most opportune time to work. Cool enough so he wouldn't tire by midday, but light enough to see what he was doing. His first task always remained the same, slowly walking his fields, inspecting them carefully. He wasn't working yet, merely observing. He checked the olive trees for signs of disease or insect damage. He examined the grain for damage from the night's wind. He studied the grapevines to see if new shoots needed support. This daily inspection took about an hour, and to any casual observer it might have seemed like a tedious activity. Alexios moved very slowly from plant to plant, occasionally stopping to touch a leaf or smell the soil. But this hour of careful observation was the foundation of everything he did. A good farmer, as he learned from his father, sees problems when they are still small enough to be easily managed. After his inspection, Alexios returned home for breakfast. The bread he had baked the previous evening, cheese from his 3 goats, olives from his own trees, and water from the well he had dug in the first year of his marriage, the same breakfast he had eaten almost every day for 2 decades. But it was still incredibly delicious, because he had earned it with his own labour. His wife, Maria, joined him as the sun rose over the hills. She was responsible for the kitchen garden, the vegetables they ate fresh, the herbs they used for cooking and medicine, and the flowers she grew simply because they made her happy. They spoke little during breakfast. After 25 years of marriage, they had learned that morning was a time for quiet preparation, not animated conversation, but their silence was not empty. It was filled with shared understanding, mutual respect, and the comfort that comes from knowing exactly what your partner is thinking without having to ask questions. After breakfast, Alexios gathered his tools. He had exactly 7 farm implements, a plough his father had made, a hoe with a handle he had replaced 3 times, a sickle for harvesting grain, a knife for pruning vines, a wooden rake, a digging stick, and a large basket woven from olive branches. These tools were not beautiful, like the golden implements in Hephaestus's forge, but they were perfect for their purpose. The plough was precisely the right weight for Alexios's strength, and precisely the right size for his fields. The hoe handle was polished by decades of use, shaped by his grip so that it fit in his hands as if custom-made. Each tool occupied its strictly defined place in the modest shed adjoining the dwelling, and day after day, as evening approached, Alexios meticulously cleaned each implement, returning it to the exact same position. Such behavior was not a manifestation of obsession or excessive meticulousness. On the contrary, it was the embodiment of deep, time-tested, practical wisdom. A farmer who is forced to spend precious minutes searching for his tools irrevocably loses a resource that, in his work, simply cannot be squandered. The essence of the labour itself, though it changed with the cyclical shift of seasons, invariably retained its fundamental characteristics. It was unhurried, rhythmic, and absolutely vital. With the arrival of spring, Alexios began preparing the land. This process involved following his mighty ox, skillfully guiding the plough that cut through the soil, softened by abundant winter rains. Each furrow required exceptional straightness and uniform spacing, being deep enough to reliably bury unwanted weeds, but not so deep as to disturb the peace and activity of beneficial earthworms. Although the ploughing process might seem straightforward from the outside, it demanded continuous and focused attention. The ox needed delicate handling to maintain an optimal pace. Excessive speed led to uneven furrows, and moving too slowly risked the work not being completed before the soil irrevocably dried out. Alexios had to tirelessly watch for hidden stones that could damage the plough, masterfully adjust his grip with every change in terrain, and maintain unwavering balance when the plough suddenly encountered unforeseen obstacles. Following the arduous ploughing came the turn of sowing, which again obliged the farmer to walk across the same fields. This time his task was to evenly distribute the seeds, which required such precise and measured movement that, from the outside, it seemed easy and natural, but in reality was achieved only through years of diligent practice and mastery. If too many seeds were in one place, the sprouts would mercilessly compete with each other for nutrients. If there were not enough seeds, the harvest would inevitably be disappointingly meagre. Summer was a time of unceasing vigilance. It was a period for meticulous weeding, regular watering, and tireless observation for pests. Alexios walked his lands twice a day, at dawn and dusk, manually removing weeds and delivering life-giving moisture to plants suffering from the exhausting heat. Perhaps this phase of agricultural labour was the most meditative. Hour after hour passed in monotonous, repetitive manual work, as he knelt in the damp earth, carefully examining each individual plant. Alexios's thoughts often drifted during these tasks. He reflected on his children, who had gone to Athens in search of a better life and work. He mentally returned to the image of his father, who had once taught him to cultivate these very fields. He made plans for future improvements he wished to implement, pondered the whims of the weather, even composed letters in his mind that were never destined to be written. However, a significant part of his attention remained invariably fixed on the work itself. He felt the texture of the soil between his fingers, sensed the weight of each weed as he pulled it out, noticed the subtle differences in shades of green that unmistakably indicated which plants were thriving and which were struggling. With the arrival of autumn came the harvest, bringing with it the long-awaited reward for a year of tireless and patient labour. But even this culminating moment was largely associated with a quiet, painstaking process, cutting the grain with smooth, rhythmic movements of a sharp sickle, carefully gathering the cut stalks into neat sheaves, then loading these sheaves onto a cart and delivering them to the threshing floor. Threshing was one of the few moments when agricultural labour took on an almost festive tone. Alexios spread the dried grain stalks on his specially equipped stone threshing floor, and then led his ox in circles, allowing the animal to trample the harvest, to separate the valuable seeds from the stalks. The work remained physically exhausting, Yet in this cyclical movement, in the gradual accumulation of a pile of golden grain, a visible confirmation of the year's successful efforts, there was something deeply satisfying. The winter period was a time of relative calm, yet by no means inaction. During these months, Alexios repaired his tools, maintained the outbuildings, and meticulously planned activities for the coming year. In the evenings he sat by the warm hearth, carefully examining the seeds saved from the last harvest, and considered exactly which crops should be planted in each of his fields. His decisions were far more complex than they might appear at first glance. Different crops absorbed varying amounts of nutrients from the soil, forcing him to carefully rotate plantings to maintain the land's fertility and health. Some plants thrived better under specific weather conditions, so Alexios had to make the most accurate possible predictions regarding the climatic features of the coming year. Certain crops were more valuable, but also entailed greater risk. Thus, he needed to find a delicate balance between potentially high profits and the threat of complete crop loss. All these complex calculations were performed without any written records, relying solely on deep knowledge passed down through generations, and enriched by his own many years of invaluable experience. Alexios was illiterate, unable to read. There was never any need for it, for his wisdom flowed from a different source. He could unfailingly predict weather changes by observing cloud formations, accurately determine the necessary amount of seeds for a field of any size, and calculate fair prices for various crops without resorting to numerical notations as understood by modern man. His extensive knowledge was imprinted not on parchment, but in his hands, in his keen eyes, in his sensitive sense of smell and delicate touch. He knew instinctively how healthy, fertile soil felt and looked, how ripe grain rustled in the wind, what unique aroma the air carried before rain began. During long winter evenings, Alexios and Maria spent time together, attending to necessary household chores by the soft light of olive oil lamps. She skillfully spun her sheep's wool, turning it into strong thread, and then wove that thread into cloth for their modest garments. He, in turn, carved new handles for worn-out tools, meticulously repaired baskets and moulded clay pots that served to store precious grain and an oil. From time to time, neighbours would visit, and they would exchange the latest news, harmless gossip, and age-old stories. Conversations primarily revolved around practical aspects of their lives, whose fields yielded the most abundant harvest, which merchant offered the fairest prices where good breeding animals could be acquired. But beyond immediate topics, they also recounted ancient traditions, myths, and legends that had been carefully passed down orally through many generations. Alexios held a special reverence for stories about Demeter, the powerful goddess of harvest. The reason for this attachment was not that he literally believed in the personal intervention of a divine being in the fate of his fields, but that these ancient tales remarkably captured the profound truth about the relationship between humanity and the earth. According to ancient myth, it was Demeter who taught mortals the art of growing grain, the secrets of baking bread, and methods of preserving food for the lean months ahead. She deeply understood that farming was not merely a mechanical process of planting and harvesting. It was something far greater, the creation of a strong, sustainable relationship with the land, capable of supporting human life year after year. In some tellings of this ancient story, Demeter herself lived for a year as an ordinary mortal, toiling in the fields and experiencing firsthand what it was like to be completely dependent on the success of the harvest. This particular part of the myth resonated deeply with Alexios, as it unambiguously suggested that even immortal gods realized that farming was a worthy endeavor, an absolutely essential job, the fundamental basis upon which all other existence rested. Inevitably, there were also unfavorable years when the rains came either too early or with unbearable delay. At times, swarms of insects devastated half the crop, and plant diseases spread despite all precautions. During these difficult periods, Alexios and his neighbours banded together, helping each other to endure, sharing the meagre provisions they still had. In one particularly harsh year, when late frosts mercilessly destroyed most of the olive blossoms, Alexios managed to survive by working part-time on a neighbour's plot, whose fields had suffered less significantly. Instead of monetary compensation, he received his share of grain and oil, enough to feed his family through the winter and save the necessary seeds for planting the following year. Such a system of mutual support was not an act of charity in the usual sense. It was a deep, time-tested, practical wisdom. Every farmer understood perfectly well that misfortune could strike any household, and that extending a helping hand to neighbours in their difficult times meant securing their support when one's own trials arrived. Alexios cultivated the same land for 45 years. When he finally reached an age where heavy physical labour became too much for him, he handed over the management of the farm to his son. The son returned from Athens, bringing with him fresh ideas about crop rotation and soil improvement methods. The transition of power was not always seamless. The son sought to implement changes that the father initially considered unnecessary. However, over time they managed to find a harmonious path, combining centuries-old traditional wisdom with innovative approaches. This land is still cultivated today. More than 2 millennia later, the olive trees Alexios planted in his youth continue to bear fruit. The stone walls he built to prevent soil erosion still stand steadfast. The well dug by his hands still supplies the surrounding area with clean, life-giving water. His name is not recorded in any historical chronicle, but his labour, this patient daily work of feeding people, continues. And in this continuity, in this eternal succession of generations, lies a kind of immortality that even the Olympian gods might envy. When you fall asleep tonight, perhaps you will remember the bread you ate during the day, the juicy fruits and fresh vegetables. Somewhere in the vast fields around the world, farmers still wake long before dawn, still walk slowly across their land, still perform the quiet yet absolutely essential work that sustains the life of each of us. And in this measured eternal rhythm of planting and harvesting, there is a deep peace that no, not even the most dramatic divine saga can disturb. While farmers like Alexios cultivated their silent fields under the benevolent Mediterranean sun, near the walls of the great city of Troy, a young woman sat alone in a temple garden, fully aware of the events to come. And yet, she painfully understood that no one would believe her words when she tried to warn them. Cassandra's gift, which she had long ceased to perceive as a blessing, descended upon her when she was barely old enough to grasp the essence of prophecy itself. Apollo, the radiant god of music, poetry, and foresight, was captivated by her otherworldly beauty and sharp intellect. As a kind of gift intended to win her favour, he offered her the unique ability to see the future with absolute crystal clarity. Young Cassandra, filled with curiosity and innocence, readily accepted this gift. What mortal would not wish to foresee the future? What inquisitive student of life would not strive to comprehend the hidden patterns shaping events, even before they occurred? However, when the god Apollo demanded reciprocated affection from Cassandra, she instantly realized the depth of her delusion. Her heart remained deaf to his pleas, unable to ignite with love for him. Her true affections were given to another, a simple mortal, whose earthly, unassuming life seemed incomparably more appealing to her than all the dazzling splendor and divine radiance of the mighty Apollo. Cassandra's refusal provoked a reaction from Apollo that vividly demonstrated a side of the divine nature that mortals often forgot. The Olympians could be incredibly petty, mercilessly vengeful, and unimaginably cruel, especially when their pride was wounded. He could not take back the gift of prophecy once given. Divine blessings once bestowed were considered inherent and eternal. However, he possessed the power to twist this gift, laying upon it a curse whose cruelty seemed almost arbitrary and senseless. Apollo delivered his verdict. Henceforth, Cassandra would invariably and accurately foresee future events, but no living soul would ever believe her prophecies. At first, Cassandra could not fully grasp the destructive power of this curse. She thought it would certainly be a source of annoyance and disappointment, but by no means an unbearable burden. She naively believed that she would simply need to be more inventive in her arguments, more convincing in her words, choosing her expressions more carefully to describe what she saw. The first harsh test of her new fate befell Cassandra when she turned 16. In a vision, strikingly clear as a sunny day, she distinctly saw her younger brother falling from the high palace roof as he tried to reach a ball thrown too high. Without losing a moment, she rushed to him, arriving just as the boy was climbing to the dangerous spot, precisely matching what she had seen in her prophetic dream. "Don't you dare climb there," she cried desperately, trying to stop him. "You'll surely fall and break your arm." But her brother merely laughed good-naturedly in response. "You worry too much, Cassandra. I climb up here all the time, and nothing bad ever happens." She attempted to explain her vision to him, but as soon as the words left her lips, she noticed the expression on his face gradually change, from carefree amusement to subtle skepticism, and then to clear irritation. The point was not that he thought she was lying. The curse worked differently. He literally could not bring himself to believe what she said, no matter how logical and well-reasoned her argument seemed. Just 5 minutes later, to Cassandra's horror, her brother fell and broke his arm, exactly as she had predicted. However, contrary to common sense, instead of strengthening people's belief in her prophetic abilities, this strikingly accurate foresight somehow only made them doubt her even more, deepening their distrust. Lying in bed with his arm in a splint, her brother was now absolutely convinced that Cassandra had somehow caused his accident herself, resorting to dark magic. "She cursed me," he told their parents. "She knew I would fall because she made it happen." Such a scenario, alas, became the unbreakable pattern of Cassandra's subsequent life. The more accurate and infallible her predictions proved to be, the more people suspected her of being the source and cause of the very calamities she so clearly foresaw. She began to be not valued for her gift, but feared, not sought for advice, but avoided. As the years passed, Cassandra gradually learned to coexist with the profound solitude inseparable from her prophetic gift. She spent a significant portion of her time in the Temple of Athena, where she served as a priestess. Her duties were calm and contemplative. She maintained the unextinguished sacred fire, cared for the cleanliness and order of the temple, and assisted the numerous visitors who came to offer prayers or bring their gifts to the goddess. These daily, repetitive rituals served as a kind of refuge for her, a salvation from the continuous stream of visions that constantly overwhelmed her mind. As she swept the temple floors, the monotonous, repetitive movements and familiar surroundings helped her focus on the present moment, distracting her from the inexorably approaching future calamities that she could so clearly foresee. The temple garden became her most beloved and cherished sanctuary. She personally planted it with medicinal herbs and beautiful flowers, spending many hours each day diligently tending to the plants. In this work, which brought immediate and tangible results, Cassandra found deep solace. Unlike her prophecies, which always concerned events she was powerless to prevent, gardening gave her a unique opportunity to truly improve something in the world around her, to see the fruits of her labor. She carefully cultivated lavender, valuing its calming aroma, mint, useful for stomach ailments, sage, known for its anti-infectious properties, and roses, simply for their beauty, which offered her a fleeting but much-needed distraction from the dark visions that constantly haunted her dreams. The garden was small, perhaps 20 by 20 feet, but it was impeccably organized and tended with boundless love. Cassandra's daily routine was as strictly regular as a farmer's, yet it was shaped by completely different, purely personal needs. She awoke long before dawn, but not to go to work in the fields, but to enjoy a few precious moments of serene calm before her mind once again began to fill with the day's visions. The early morning hours usually remained relatively peaceful in her mind. The future in these moments seemed more distant, somehow less urgent and threatening. She slowly walked through her garden, watering the plants and carefully inspecting them for any problems, enjoying the simple yet profound pleasure of work that had clear meaning and brought such desired, predictable results. Then she solemnly lit the sacred fire in the temple and spent an hour in deep meditation, trying to mentally prepare for any visions the coming day might bring. Upon completing her morning duties, Cassandra often took a walk through the city of Troy, observing the daily bustle around her with the unique, dual perspective of someone capable of seeing both the present and the future simultaneously. She watched merchants set up their stalls in the bustling market, and she knew unerringly which of them would prosper and which would inevitably fail. She observed carefree children playing in the dusty streets, and she knew who among them was destined to grow into heroes, and who would perish young in wars they could not yet even conceive of. She saw loving couples intertwining their fates, and she knew which relationships would withstand the test of time and which would inevitably end in heartbreak. This dual vision, this ability to see through the fabric of time, engendered in her a deep sense of alienation and detachment from the surrounding world. It was akin to watching a play after having already read its entire script, from beginning to end. One could, of course, appreciate the actors' skill and the subtleties of their performance, but it was impossible to share with the rest of the audience the thrilling sense of uncertainty about how the unfolding story would end. The most agonizing aspect of her gift was not the foresight of large, inevitable calamities. Far worse was witnessing a series of small, seemingly preventable tragedies, and yet being absolutely powerless to stop them. She saw a young mother feeding her infant honey, knowing that the child would inevitably fall ill. But when she tried to warn the woman, her words simply dissolved into the air, failing to reach her consciousness. She saw merchants making ruinous business decisions that would lead to their downfall. She saw farmers planting their crops in fields that would soon be flooded. She saw young warriors embarking on military campaigns destined to end only in senseless defeats and death. And each time, moved by compassion, she tried to intervene and help. The curse inexorably took effect, ensuring that her warnings would be dismissed as the incoherent ramblings of a deranged young woman. Gradually, Cassandra learned to carefully choose which battles were worth fighting. She stopped wasting effort on preventing minor misfortunes, preferring to conserve her dwindling energy for truly catastrophic events. But even in these, the most critical cases, she very rarely managed to change anything at all. The greatest test of her resilience and emotional fortitude came when the first, initially still vague, visions of the impending Trojan War began to appear in her mind. These prophetic images were indistinct, silhouettes of ships on the distant horizon, unsettling dreams of fire and plumes of smoke, fleeting glimpses of familiar faces distorted by grimaces of fear and unrestrained anger. However, as the war inexorably approached, Cassandra's visions became increasingly concrete, terrifying and unbearably clear. She distinctly saw the arriving Greek ships, their black sails taut in the Mediterranean winds, carrying doom. She saw the beach beneath the majestic walls of Troy, entirely strewn with enemy soldiers. She foresaw the ensuing decade-long siege, the agonizing hunger and utter despair that gripped the city, and the deaths of friends and family she had known since childhood. But clearest of all, with chilling clarity, she saw the very end, the giant wooden horse, the soldiers hidden inside, the inevitable fall of Troy, and the death of almost everyone she had ever loved and cherished. Months before the actual start of the war, Cassandra desperately tried to warn the Trojan leadership. She spoke with her father, the mighty King Priam, describing all the coming calamities in minute detail. She addressed the military commanders, explaining to them exactly how the Greeks would conduct the siege of the city. She even tried to persuade ordinary citizens to leave Troy before it was too late, while there was still some chance of salvation. However, Apollo's ancient curse held firm, with merciless power. The more specific and frighteningly accurate her warnings became, the more stubbornly people rejected her words, considering Cassandra mentally unbalanced. Some felt pity for her, others unconcealed fear, but no soul could believe her. The most heartbreaking moment, perhaps, came when she tried to warn her brother Hector, Troy's greatest warrior, and the man she loved most in the world. She saw his death in a vision, so vivid and detailed that she awoke with her own scream. She found Hector within the palace walls, where he was training with his sword in the cool light of early morning. For a moment, watching his refined, fluid movements and absolute, unwavering confidence, she almost convinced herself that her terrible vision was wrong. Hector seemed invulnerable to her, almost immortal, too strong and skilled a warrior to be defeated by any mortal enemy. But when, gathering all her courage, she told him of her vision, of how he would fall at the hands of the great Greek hero Achilles, how his body would be dishonorably dragged around the city walls, how his death would mark the beginning of Troy's final and inevitable collapse. Hector listened to her with the patient kindness he always invariably showed his sister. Then he gently but firmly explained that he could not allow fear of a possible future to prevent him from fulfilling his sacred duty. "Even if what you see is the pure truth," he said, "I cannot abandon my people to save only myself. And besides, the future is not predetermined, is it? Perhaps your warnings will help me be more careful and vigilant." Cassandra wished with all her being to tell him that the future was indeed predetermined, that her visions always came true exactly as she saw them, that his death was as inevitable as the daily rising of the sun. However, she could not bring herself to utterly destroy that tiny spark of hope that flickered in his soul. When the war finally erupted, Cassandra watched from the city walls as events unfolded with astonishing, eerie precision, as if following a pre-written script. The Greek ships arrived in strict accordance with what was foretold. The siege began exactly as she had predicted. One after another, each of her prophecies came true with terrifying inevitability. As the arduous years of wartime dragged on endlessly, Cassandra found herself a prisoner of an extraordinary, almost unbearable state of deferred life. She knew, of course, how it would all end, but she still had to live through each day, experience each battle, embrace fleeting glimpses of hope, and swallow the bitter pills of disappointment. As if an invisible curtain concealed the inevitability of the finale, as if fate were not yet sealed, she continued to perform her temple duties, tirelessly maintaining the unextinguished flame of the sacred fire and diligently cultivating her humble garden. In the measured rhythm of daily rituals she found fragile solace, while the world around her inexorably plunged into chaos and destruction. The herbs she grew became increasingly valuable as the siege continued, as the city's apothecaries emptied. Her skill in the art of healing at least found recognition, even when her ominous predictions met only deaf rejection. At the twilight of the long war, when the shadows of hunger deepened over the city, becoming an incessant companion, and the last ray of hope had almost vanished, Cassandra received her last great vision. The wooden horse, allegedly left by the retreating Greeks, was ceremoniously brought through the city walls by the Trojans, who perceived it as an undeniable symbol of triumph. She ran through the cobbled streets, crying out desperate warnings, imploring her fellow citizens not to bring the ominous gift within the sacred city limits. She rushed to the turning wheels of the cart that carried it, desperately trying to stop its movement with her own body. She pointed out the obvious trap without hesitation. For what sense was there for the Greeks to leave such a generous, magnificent gift, unless it served their insidious hidden designs? But the ancient curse proved stronger than any rational thought, impervious to irrefutable evidence, and stifling even the desperate love in her voice. The Trojans dragged the horse inside the walls, celebrated their illusory triumph with exhilaration, and fell asleep, convinced that the years-long war had finally ended. Cassandra spent that fateful night alone in her temple, watching the sacred flame and anticipating the inevitable finale that she had foreseen and awaited for many long years. When the Greek soldiers poured out of the horse's belly and flung open the city gates, When the final deadly struggle erupted in the streets below, she felt a strange, almost paradoxical sense of relief. At least now, finally, her agonizingly long wait had come to an end. Legends about Cassandra's demise vary in detail depending on the storyteller. However, most tales agree on one thing. She died as she lived, tirelessly speaking truth that no one wished to hear, possessing clear sight in a world that stubbornly preferred the comfortable shroud of willful blindness. As you fall asleep tonight, you might ponder all the Cassandras in the world, the people who foresee impending hardships and dangers, who desperately try to warn others, who dare to speak inconvenient truths that humanity stubbornly refuses to acknowledge. And perhaps, just perhaps, humanity could learn to listen a little more closely to those voices that see something many would prefer not to notice at all. The morning sun gently illuminates the Aegean Sea, and before one's eyes appear the docks of ancient Piraeus, one of the busiest ports of ancient Athens. The rich, earthy aroma of olive oil hangs in the air, intertwined with salty splashes from the harbour. Merchant ships, gently swaying at their berths, capture attention, their holds packed to capacity with amphorae, filled to the brim with this liquid gold. This morning was different from the ordinary routine of ancient Greece. Here beat the heart of one of the most significant trade arteries ever to flourish in the vast Mediterranean. Here unfolded a silent yet powerful transformation, turning humble olive oil into the cornerstone of Greek prosperity, one discrete transaction after another. Imagine slowly strolling through these ancient streets to understand how ordinary olive oil became a true treasure for entire nations. One's gaze drifts to where a merchant named Cleomenes intently inspects his cargo. His calloused, weather-beaten hands carefully glide over the smooth, matte surface of a clay amphora, searching for the slightest flaws or cracks that could damage the precious contents. Each vessel held approximately 6 gallons of the finest olive oil, harvested from the fertile groves stretching beyond Athens, oil that was soon to travel hundreds of miles by sea to numerous, eager buyers scattered across the entire then civilized world. The oil's journey to market began long before this, months before shipment, when the olive harvest painted the gentle slopes of Attica in picturesque shades of emerald green and silver shimmer. One is transported back to that time. Entire families work together under the benevolent autumn sun, skillfully wielding long wooden poles to knock ripe olives from the fruitful branches. The fruits gently fell onto carefully spread woven mats placed beneath each tree, forming vibrant splashes of green and black that would soon transform into precious liquid treasure. Within the walls of the olive presses, giant stone millstones tirelessly and rhythmically rotated, grinding the harvested olives into a uniform, thick paste. This paste was then carefully layered between dense woven mats and subjected to pressure under the weight of colossal loads, extracting streams of golden oil that slowly flowed into specially arranged collection basins. It was the first pressing that yielded oil of unparalleled quality, sparkling with transparency and exuding an exquisite aroma, destined for the most discerning clients and sold at the highest prices. However, let us return to the present moment. At this very instant, the observer sees Cleomenes engaged in a lively conversation, discussing optimal delivery routes with his experienced captain, a man with a weathered, tanned face whose deep knowledge of winds and sea currents would be a decisive factor in the success of this entire commercial enterprise. Before them, on a rough wooden crate, lay a simple yet detailed map, its corners weighed down by small stones, lest the gentle Mediterranean breeze scatter their carefully planned arrangements. The captain's tanned finger carefully traces the intended route, which will initially lead them to the shores of Aegina, then to Delos, that sacred island where merchants from all corners of the then-known world gathered for lively trade. From Delos their path might lead to Rhodes, where the once majestic Colossus stood as an unwavering guardian at the entrance to another prosperous harbour. Or, as an alternative, they could move west, to Corinth, where merchants transshipped goods between the waters of the Aegean and Ionian seas, thereby avoiding the risky and long voyage around the southern tip of Greece. The observer could not help but notice the striking methodicalness of each step. There was no room for reckless adventures or turbulent excitements in this process. It was meticulous, measured trade, founded on unwavering trust and established routine. Cleomenes was well versed in the preferences of his clients in each port city. He knew that skilled perfumers in Alexandria were willing to pay exorbitant prices for his finest oil, while practical soap makers in Rome readily purchased second and third pressings at significantly more modest prices. The careful loading begins, and one sees dockworkers meticulously rolling massive amphorae across sturdy wooden gangplanks into the depths of the ship's hold. Each amphora bore stamped impressions recounting its origin. They indicated where the olives were grown, when they were pressed, and in whose workshop the oil was produced. These were not merely goods, they were unbreakable promises of quality, shaped and maintained over many generations. As the vessel finally prepares to cast off, the observer mentally follows it across the expanse of the wine-dark sea, sung by Homer himself. One imagines the gentle rocking of the ship, carrying its invaluable cargo to distant marketplaces. In distant Alexandria, noble Egyptian dignitaries would use this oil to keep their skin smooth under the scorching desert heat. In majestic Rome, wealthy citizens would add it to their baths, cherishing the belief that it would bestow even greater beauty upon them. In bustling Black Sea ports, locals would mix it with various herbs to prepare potent medicinal remedies and healing salves. However, olive oil represented something far greater than just a luxury item. It was a fundamental basis of daily existence for all peoples of the Mediterranean. Of course, it was used in cooking, but also as soap, as fuel for lamps, and as an effective medicinal remedy. Athletes rubbed it into their muscles before competitions, and then scraped off the residue after training, using special bronze tools known as strigils. It was massaged into the delicate skin of infants, and older people resorted to its aid to alleviate joint pain. The prosperity brought by this trade to Athens was truly colossal. The silver owls on the famous Athenian coins depicting the city's patron bird and its goddess returned along the same sea routes that had previously exported the oil. It was this silver that paid for the grand construction of the Parthenon, funded magnificent dramatic festivals, and supported the numerous philosophers and artists whose contributions transformed Athens into the undisputed intellectual and cultural centre of the entire ancient world. Now the observer wanders through the bustling agora, passing numerous stalls where small traders measure out oil in cups for local residents. There, a housewife unhurriedly bargains for the price of a small amphora. which will last her family for an entire month. Children dart nimbly between the stalls, and one notices how oil vendors prudently keep their merchandise in the shade, protecting it from the scorching heat that could spoil the precious sweet oil. The olive oil trade, of course, was not limited to Athens alone. Every Greek polis with a favourable climate sought to develop its own olive groves and establish an export business. The island of Lesbos, for example, gained renown for its exceptionally delicate oil, while Sparta, despite its reputation as a purely military power, also exported significant quantities of olive oil to finance its mighty army and provide for its citizens. Competition in the market was intense, yet it possessed a peculiar gentleness. Merchants competed with each other on product quality and reliability of supply, and not just on price dumping. An impeccable reputation for honest dealings and consistent product quality was valued far more highly than momentary profit from selling diluted or inferior oil. Such an approach, based on the unconditional priority of reputation, fostered the formation of trade ties that spanned generations, as sons inherited not only their father's enterprises, but also carefully nurtured strong networks of mutual trust. The technical intricacies of this trade were striking in their elegant simplicity. Experienced ship captains masterfully learned to recognize the subtle harbingers of changing weather. Realizing that a sudden storm could instantly destroy the results of many months of painstaking labor, they developed special, time-tested methods for stacking amphorae so that they would not shatter against each other during sea swells or in a raging sea. The amphorae themselves were true works of pottery art. Their shapes were carefully designed to ensure easy stacking and convenient transport, while securely protecting their valuable contents. As dusk falls in ancient Piraeus, the observer notices the last ship of the day slowly disappearing beyond the horizon. The harbour gradually descends into silence, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the massive stone breakwaters. Merchants, having completed their daily affairs, begin meticulously tallying their profits and losses. Meanwhile, dockworkers head home, anticipating modest suppers, which will, in all likelihood, include bread dipped in the very olive oil they tirelessly loaded throughout the day. This inconspicuous yet profound transformation in trade spawned something far greater than mere material wealth. It skillfully wove the entire vast Mediterranean world into a single network of interdependence and fruitful cultural exchange. Ideas like precious olive oil travelled along the same sea routes. Philosophers, artists, and inventors moved freely from one polis to another, generously sharing accumulated knowledge and thereby laying the fundamental foundations of Western civilization. The olive oil trade also served as a catalyst for the formation of some of the earliest international standards in history. Merchants relentlessly developed unified measures, quality classification systems, and common business customs, which significantly facilitated trade operations between peoples speaking different languages and worshipping diverse deities. These innovative standards subsequently became the cornerstone for all subsequent, increasingly complex international commerce. When one falls asleep tonight, one should imagine these ancient ships, gently swaying on the serene seas. Their valuable cargo in the holds carried not only oil, but also, in essence, the seeds of civilization itself to all known corners of the ancient world. What other, seemingly simple crafts and unnoticed exchanges have shaped the world as we know it today? And what undiscovered stories do they still hold within them? The image of oil-laden ships gradually fades from memory as the observer's attention shifts south to a completely different Greek city-state. Here, in the picturesque valleys of Laconia, one finds oneself in the surprisingly unassuming streets of Sparta, where daily life unfolded in entirely different rhythms and customs, strikingly distinct from the bustling commercial activity of Athens. Dawn breaks in Sparta, and the city awakens not to the clamour of merchants or the bustling noise of bazaars, but to the measured, rhythmic steps of citizens embarking on their daily duties. The observer immediately notes how different this place is from the lively Athenian agora. The streets here seem wider, yet significantly less crowded. The buildings appear more modest, yet their construction exudes solidity and reliability. The entire surrounding environment eloquently speaks of a society whose life was organized around one dominant, all-encompassing goal. The observer follows a group of 30-year-old Spartans who are purposefully heading to their communal daily dining hall, known as the Syssitia. These are not warriors going to battle, but full citizens going to breakfast. Yet in their movements there is an involuntary, refined precision, the result of a lifetime dedicated to strict communal discipline and unwavering routine. The dining hall itself is a very modest structure. Its walls lack the exquisite artistic decorations that one might find in other prosperous Greek polis. Inside, about 15 men gather around low tables, not for lavish feasts, but for a meal that is known for its simplicity and exceptional practicality. The most famous dish served here is the so-called black broth, a soup made from pork, blood, vinegar, and salt. Visitors from other cities often found its taste almost unbearable, yet the Spartans consumed it without the slightest complaint, which only underscored their unpretentiousness. The observer, quietly seated in a corner, carefully watches as these men silently share their morning meal. Their conversations are restrained, exceptionally practical, and fully focused on the day's upcoming duties. One of the men discusses the detailed training schedule for the youths under his care. Another mentions the urgent need for repair work on a small family farm located outside the city. There is a complete absence of political discussions here in the sense they were conducted in Athens. No debates about democracy or deep philosophical reflections. In Sparta, the social system had long been established and unconditionally accepted by all, leaving daily conversations free to focus solely on pressing practical matters. After breakfast, the observer accompanies one of these men, Pantites, who heads to the training ground to spend the morning working with adolescents. This training is not the cruel, harsh regimen that popular imagination often depicts. Instead, before his eyes unfolds a careful, methodical process aimed at progressively building physical fitness, strengthening mental resilience, and fostering group loyalty through systematic repetitions and gradually escalating challenges. The boys run in formation, their feet creating synchronized rhythmic patterns in the rising dust. They practice with spears and shields, but a significant portion of the training focuses on developing coordination and endurance, rather than honing individual combat skills. They learn songs not for entertainment, but work and marching compositions that help them move together as a single cohesive organism. What strikes the observer most is the exceptional calm and routine nature of everything. There are no shouts, no punishments, no dramatic tension. The boys know perfectly well what is expected of them and comply without question. The trainers clearly understand their roles and perform them flawlessly. This is a system that has been perfected over many generations to produce precisely the citizens that Sparta so vitally needed. The observer notes that the boys are not all of the same age. Older adolescents actively help train the younger ones, thereby forming a continuous and self-sustaining chain of learning and mutual responsibility. Thus, a 16-year-old youth patiently shows a 12-year-old how to properly hold a shield, while an 18-year-old demonstrates a complex wrestling hold to a group of 14-year-olds. This is not just elementary military training. It is the fundamental basis of the entire social system that will define and guide the entire lives of these youths in Spartan society. Upon completion of the morning training, the observer follows Pantites to a place where girls and young women diligently perform their own exercises. Unlike most other Greek cities, Spartan women actively participate in physical training, competing in running and various contests, the main goal of which is to form them into strong and healthy mothers of future warriors. The training grounds for women are filled with quiet but energetic activity. The observer notices young women practicing sprints, their movements economical and precise. Others engage in wrestling matches where the emphasis is on technique and agility rather than brute strength. The general atmosphere here is very similar to that of the men's training. Serious, focused, yet devoid of harshness and unpleasant pressure. It is particularly striking how deeply this system is integrated into the daily life of the Spartans. These are not separate special events or solemn official ceremonies. They are simply an integral part of what Spartans do day in and day out, year after year. Physical training here is organically intertwined with education, social interaction, and comprehensive preparation for adult responsibilities. The observer spends the afternoon in another part of the city, carefully watching the helots, the agricultural workers whose tireless labour underpins the entire Spartan system. Their lives are strikingly different from the existence of citizens. However, even here he notes the same emphasis on routine, efficiency and mutual responsibility that permeates all aspects of Spartan society. Helots work on the extensive farms surrounding the city, diligently growing barley, olives and various vegetables that provide sustenance for the entire population. Their labour is hard but performed unhurriedly, with measured pace. They deeply understand their role in the larger social system, and most, it seems, take it for granted. Some Helot families had lived with the same Spartan families for many generations, creating relationships that, though inherently unequal, were nevertheless stable and predictable. As evening approaches, the observer returns to the central part of the city to witness the work of the Council of Elders, who conduct the day's affairs. The Gerousia, as this body is called, consists of men over 60 years of age who have earned the right to participate in shaping and directing Spartan policy. Their meetings are surprisingly quiet and efficient, a stark contrast to the noisy and often chaotic gatherings that one might observe in democratic Athens. The elders discuss solely practical matters, the distribution of vital resources, the resolution of disputes between citizens, and the organization of upcoming religious festivals. Their decisions are based on deeply rooted traditions and time-tested practical wisdom, rather than on abstract principles or innovative ideas. This society is conservative in the true sense of the word, valuing tried and tested methods above any experimental approaches. The observer notes that even Sparta's architecture eloquently reflects these fundamental values. The buildings here are characterized by strength and functionality, rather than decorative beauty. The city lacks the impressive temples and majestic monuments that are the hallmark of other Greek polis. Instead, the Spartans, it seems, genuinely believed that their greatest monuments were their citizens themselves, men and women shaped by generations of careful training and strict social organization. Sparta's economic system is equally distinctive. Spartan citizens are strictly forbidden from engaging in trade or commercial activities. Instead, they derive their livelihood from the agricultural labor of the helots and through state distribution of resources. This circumstance frees them from the need to earn a living, allowing them to fully concentrate on their key roles as warriors and citizens. However, such a system also makes Spartan society critically dependent on the continuous cooperation of the helots and on established trade relations with other city-states. As night falls, the observer sees families gathering for evening meals. Spartan family life proves to be warmer and more relaxed than one might expect, given the strict societal rules. Parents play with their children, tell them stories, and share the quiet joys of home. The difference is that even family time here serves the broader goals of Spartan society. Children learn values and attitudes from an early age that will guide them throughout their lives as full citizens. Spartan marriage customs are of particular interest. Spartan marriages are concluded primarily for the purpose of bearing strong, healthy children, but they are also genuine partnerships between individuals who share common values and life goals. Women in Sparta possess greater independence and power than in most other Greek cities, partly because their husbands are often away on long military service. The observer spends the final moments of his stay in Sparta slowly strolling through the silent streets as the ancient city gradually falls into the embrace of night. Guards methodically patrol their posts, but there is almost no anxiety in the air about crime or potential unrest. The local social system masterfully constructs powerful incentives for universal cooperation and genuine mutual support. Residents know their neighbours well, clearly understand their own roles in society, and as a rule find deep satisfaction in conscientiously fulfilling their duties. What is particularly striking about Spartan society is its incredible resilience and astonishing stability. While many other Greek polis are constantly shaken by political cataclysms, revolutionary upheavals, and acute social conflicts, Sparta has maintained its steadfastness for many centuries. The effectiveness of this system is due to its foundation, which rests on clearly defined expectations, unwavering consistency in citizen training, and shared values that every Spartan not only understands but genuinely embraces. Critics from other city-states often depict Sparta as harsh or overly restrictive, yet from within this system is perceived more as a flawlessly choreographed dance, where each participant perfectly knows their movements and takes genuine pleasure in their virtuosic execution. It is a society that invariably places stability, security, and a common collective goal significantly above individual freedom and the pursuit of innovation. Preparing for sleep, one can only imagine the deep, quiet serenity that life in such a society offers, where every person understands their role and can fully rely on others to flawlessly perform theirs. This manifests in a different form of freedom, not in the unrestrained ability to do whatever one pleases, but in the freedom that stems from a sense of belonging to something far grander than oneself, How would such unwavering confidence and unified purpose feel? And what would be gained or lost if humanity chose precisely such a path? From the disciplined assurance of Sparta, the observer's attention now shifts to Athens, but to a part of the city that often remains unnoticed in grand narratives of philosophy and politics. The researcher's gaze falls upon the women's quarters of an Athenian home, where, thread by thread, a completely different kind of civilization is being created. The morning light gently filters through small windows into a room filled with the soft, industrious sounds of women working. Here, one hears the measured rhythm of the loom, the almost inaudible whisper of thread gliding through fabric, and the quiet, low conversations that accompany hours of painstaking, focused work. It is here, far from the bustling public spaces where men debate and strike deals, that much of daily life unfolds. Now, a deep dive into the fascinating world of Athenian women and their truly indispensable labour. The observer sees Aspasia, not the famous companion of Pericles, but a more typical Athenian woman, beginning her daily ritual at the loom. Her fingers move with refined, almost instinctive precision, expertly guiding the shuttle back and forth through the taut vertical warp threads. She is creating a length of the finest woolen fabric, ultimately destined to become a chiton, the primary garment worn by most Greeks. The entire process began long before this, several months ago, when sheep grazed on the gentle hillsides outside the city. After shearing, the wool was carefully sorted by quality and shade. The finest and most valuable fleeces were set aside for making the most important garments. Perhaps it would be a cloak for her husband or an exquisite festive dress for her daughter. Coarser wool was designated for everyday clothing, warm blankets, or household textiles. Aspasia and the other women in the house spent weeks preparing the wool for weaving. First, they diligently cleaned it, removing tiny pieces of grass, burrs and dirt clinging to the fleece. Then came carding, the process of aligning all the fibres in one direction using bronze combs. The prepared wool was then spun into thread using spindles, small weights attached to wooden rods that twisted the fibres together as they fell. Spinning was a particularly social activity. Women could spin while walking, conversing, or watching children. Groups of neighbours often gathered together to spin, exchanging news and gossip while their hands were occupied with familiar, repetitive movements. A skilled spinner could produce threads so fine and even that the resulting fabric would be almost transparent. Now, at the loom, one can observe this thread transforming into fabric. The loom itself is a simple yet ingenious invention. Essentially, it is a frame that holds one set of threads, the warp, under tension, while the weaver interlaces another set, the weft, at right angles. Different patterns emerge depending on how the threads are raised and lowered with each pass of the shuttle. Aspasia is working on a complex pattern that will create a border of geometric figures. This requires careful counting and thoughtful planning. She must remember which threads to raise for each row, creating a pattern that first exists only in her memory and gradually manifests on the fabric. There are no written patterns. Knowledge is passed from woman to woman through demonstration and repeated practice. Other women in the room are engaged in various aspects of textile production. Aspasia's teenage daughter practices on a smaller loom, learning to maintain even tension and straight edges. Her younger daughter spins, developing the finger strength and coordination she will need for more complex work. Even the household enslaved women participate in this labor, though their tasks are typically the more routine aspects of preparation and finishing. The observer notes how the work creates natural opportunities for education and socialization. While weaving, women discuss household management, child rearing, and the complex social relationships that govern Athenian society. Young girls acquire not only technical skills, but also the values, expectations, and practical knowledge they will need in adulthood. Today's conversation focuses on preparations for the Panathenaic Games, the grand Athenian festival honoring the goddess Athena. Every 4 years, the women of Athens collectively create a new peplos, a ceremonial garment for Athena's statue in the Parthenon. This garment represents the highest achievement of Athenian weaving, incorporating intricate scenes from mythology rendered in coloured threads. Aspasia's sister, who works on the looms in the public workshop dedicated to the peplos, describes the meticulous planning required for this complex project. The scenes must be historically accurate, artistically beautiful, and technically flawless. The master weavers design the overall composition, but the actual work is distributed among dozens of women, each responsible for specific sections. The peplos project demonstrates how central textile work is to the religious and civic life of Athens. The presentation of the new garment to Athena is the culmination of the Panathenaic procession. The very procession depicted on the Parthenon frieze. In some ways, the women's weaving work is as important to the festival as the men's athletic competitions or the philosophers' speeches. Beyond its deep religious significance, textile production also plays a crucial role in the Athenian economy. The city exports finished fabric throughout the Mediterranean, successfully competing with producers from other regions known for their textiles. Athenian wool cloaks are valued for their warmth and durability, while linen goods, woven from imported Egyptian flax, are in high demand for their fineness and comfort. The afternoon is dedicated to observing the dyeing process, as plain white fabric is transformed with rich, deep colours. Women use various natural sources for their dyes. Madder root yields red, saffron yellow, indigo blue, and expensive murex shells the exquisite purple shades favoured by wealthy clients. Dyeing requires precise timing and strict temperature control. Too hot and the fabric can be damaged. Too cold and the colour will not penetrate properly. The women test each batch on small samples before using valuable fabric for the main process. Years of experience have taught them to recognise the subtle signs indicating when conditions are ideal. Colour also carries significant social meaning. Certain shades are associated with specific social classes or occasions. Young women wear brighter and more cheerful colours, while older women choose more muted, tranquil tones. Religious festivals require white garments, while mourning implies black or dark colours. The weavers must understand these social codes as well as they understand the technical aspects of their craft. As evening approaches, one sees the day's work neatly put away. Finished fabric is folded and placed in wooden chests with aromatic herbs to protect against insects. Unfinished work is carefully covered to protect it from dust and moisture. Tools are cleaned and organised for the next day's work. The economic aspects of textile production vividly demonstrate the crucial, yet often hidden role of women in Athens' prosperity. While men conduct business in the agora, women create much of the actual wealth through their skilled labour. A woman who can produce fine fabric makes a significant contribution to her family's income and social status. Some women even run small businesses from home, taking orders for specific garments or selling their work through male relatives in the market. These arrangements require careful negotiation and planning, as women must operate within social constraints that limit their direct participation in public trade. The training of young weavers unfolded according to a meticulously calibrated system, progressing from elementary operations to more complex tasks. A young craftswoman might begin her journey by winding threads or sorting wool raw material, gradually moving on to spinning, then to the basics of weaving, and finally to the most sophisticated pattern weaving. The most skilled weavers earned recognition, which led to prestigious commissions and higher pay for their labour. Quality control in textile production depended entirely on the virtuosity and conscientiousness of each individual worker. There were no mechanical means of inspection or precise measuring instruments. All responsibility lay with the weaver's ability to maintain constant thread tension, uniform spacing between rows, and impeccable technique throughout many hours of monotonous work. This circumstance underscored the exceptional importance of concentration, endurance, and deep respect for one's craft. The social aspects of weaving extended far beyond individual family hearths. Women from neighbouring homes often shared resources and accumulated experience with each other. One renowned for her skill in creating intricate ornaments might share her knowledge with others, receiving support in return for daily chores. These extensive networks of mutual support and knowledge exchange served as a foundation for both individual family units and the entire broader community. As the day drew to a close and the women began preparing evening meals, the observer involuntarily pondered how much of civilization depends on this quiet, patient work. Every garment, every piece of home decor, every sail for the ships that carried Athenian commercial wealth, all originated in the hands of women sitting at looms, creating order and beauty from simple threads. The monotonous yet harmonious movements of the loom, with hours of practice, transformed almost into a meditative state. The repetitive actions freed the mind for unhurried conversations, deep reflections, or simply the peaceful concentration that comes from well-executed, skillful work. In a world where mechanical aids for labour were rare, such productive meditation occupied a significant portion of daily existence. As evening arrives and people prepare for sleep, they imagine the gentle sounds of the loom and the deep satisfaction born from creating something beautiful and necessary with one's own hands. Reflections arise on how these ancient rhythms of labour and rest, personal skill and collective interaction continue to resonate in the modern world. What important work is performed invisibly around us daily? And who are the weavers today? The gentle rhythm of the loom fades as the narrative transports the reader from the domestic spaces of Athens to its most famous outdoor classrooms. The traveller finds himself on a tree-lined path beyond the city walls, where the faint whisper of voices engaged in the unhurried pursuit of truth drifts through the morning air. Before one's eyes lay the academy, a picturesque grove planted with olive trees where Plato and his followers gathered day after day to delve into the fundamental questions of human existence. Unlike the strict lecture halls that one might imagine, this was simply a pleasant garden where people sat in small groups, exchanging thoughts and reflecting together under the dappled shade of ancient trees. The observer sits down on a stone bench near where Plato himself sits with 3 of his students. Today, they are not engaged in discussing grand theories or abstract mathematical concepts. Instead, they are examining a subject as mundane and tangible as an olive leaf. which one of the students holds in his hand. What distinguishes this particular leaf from all others? What makes it unmistakably an olive leaf and not a fig or grape leaf? The conversation unfolds unhurriedly, without any rush or strictly defined plan. Plato asks delicate, leading questions that help his students explore their own assumptions. When one of the youths confidently asserts that the shape of the leaf determines its identity, Plato asks him to consider whether leaves damaged by insects or altered in form are less authentic olive leaves due to the change in their outlines. In another part of this same grove, the observer witnesses a different kind of activity. An older student teaches geometry to several younger ones, drawing figures in the sand with a stick. They are working on one of the proofs that Plato considers a cornerstone of enlightenment. This is likely the famous demonstration that the area of the square built on the hypotenuse of a right triangle is equivalent to the sum of the areas of the squares built on its two other sides. Such painstaking inquiry could last for hours. The observer notes how greatly this method differs from the swift debates and sophisticated rhetoric practiced by the sophists in the agora. Here the goal was not to win an argument, but to achieve a deeper and clearer understanding of reality. Students learned the art of questioning their initial judgments, considering alternative paths, and distinguishing genuine knowledge from mere assumptions. Aristotle slowly walks along the covered walkways of the Lyceum, known as the Peripatoi, which gave his philosophical school its name, the Peripatetics. During this walk he engages in conversation, and his students follow him, holding scrolls to record the most significant thoughts. It seems that physical activity contributes to mental plasticity and stimulates creative processes. Mathematical inquiries are not separate from philosophy, but inextricably intertwined with it. Plato believed that studying mathematics sharpens the mind, preparing it for philosophical reflection. Both activities require the ability to go beyond momentary phenomena and grasp abstract interconnections that remain constant even as specific examples change. The traveller proceeds to the Lyceum, another grove where Aristotle teaches his students using a different method. Here the primary emphasis shifts to painstaking observation and rigorous systematization. Students immerse themselves in the study of plants, animals, and minerals, learning the art of noticing minute details and organizing their observations into logically connected categories. Today's discussion centers on the fundamental question of what constitutes a good life. Unlike Plato, who might approach this topic through abstract reasoning about the essence of goodness itself, Aristotle begins with concrete examples. He encourages his students to reflect on people they know whose lives seem worthy. What do these people have in common? What habits and practices characterize their daily existence? The observer notes how such an approach makes philosophy accessible and extremely relevant to everyday life. Students do not need to grasp complex theoretical concepts before they can begin to improve their lives. They can start immediately, carefully tracking their habits and gradually guiding them toward virtue and excellence. Students offer diverse answers. Good people are generous to others. They are brave in the face of difficulties. They work diligently on what develops their natural talents. They maintain friendships based on mutual respect and shared values. Gradually, a complete picture of virtue emerges, presented as a set of practical habits rather than a collection of abstract knowledge. A Stoic teacher named Cleanthes sits with his students by one of the painted walls that gave the Stoa its name. Although the frescoes depict scenes of heroic battles and triumphs, Cleanthes uses them to illustrate an idea contrary to their obvious meaning. True victory, he believes, is achieved not by overcoming external adversaries, but by mastering one's own passions and reactions. In the afternoon, the traveller visits the Stoa Poikile, the painted colonnade where Stoic philosophers gather. With the Stoics, a different approach is again found, focused on cultivating inner peace and imperturbability. They deeply believe that true happiness stems not from external circumstances, but from a clear awareness of what is within our power and what is beyond it. One of the students asks how to overcome grief caused by the loss of a loved one. Cleanthes acknowledges that such a loss inevitably entails suffering. However, he draws a fine line between the initial, unavoidable emotional reaction and the additional torment we create ourselves through our judgments and expectations. People can learn to accept what happens without adding unnecessary mental anguish. Stoic teaching methods are strikingly practical. Students learn the art of starting each day by reminding themselves of the likelihood that something might go wrong, and that others will sometimes behave improperly. Such preparation is not an expression of pessimism, but rather a realistic view of the world. It helps them face difficulties with complete composure, avoiding shock and anger. Another Stoic exercise involves mentally envisioning the loss of what is particularly valuable: health, property, personal relationships. The goal is not to become indifferent to these blessings, but to appreciate them more fully while they are available, and to mentally prepare for the inevitable changes of life. The observer spends time with the Epicureans in their garden outside the city. Contrary to common misconceptions, these thinkers dedicated themselves not to the pursuit of fleeting sensory pleasures, but to a meticulous analysis of what truly provides long-term satisfaction. They came to the profound conviction that modest joys, strong friendships, inner peace, and the absence of suffering are far more reliable sources of happiness than wealth, fame, or ambitious power. The Epicurean garden functions almost as a prototype of an early commune. Its members share resources and responsibilities, thereby forming a stable environment where they can wholly dedicate themselves to philosophical inquiry, free from the distractions of competition and the pursuit of accumulation. They cultivate their own food, make their own clothes, and generally strive to minimize their dependence on the broader society surrounding them. The dialogues held in the Epicurean garden were generally characterized by greater personal depth and therapeutic orientation than conversations in other philosophical schools. Students openly discussed their fears, anxieties, and innermost aspirations, learning the art of philosophical reflection on these inner experiences. For example, death was not perceived as something to be feared, because one cannot experience its arrival while one still exists. Death is absent from our lives, and when it comes, we ourselves are no longer there. Epicurus argued that many human desires are artificial, created under social pressure, rather than dictated by natural need. Students learn to clearly distinguish necessary and unnecessary desires, gradually simplifying their lives to focus entirely on truly significant things. This was not self-serving asceticism, but a pragmatic strategy for achieving true contentment. The teaching methods were in many ways strikingly consistent with modern approaches. Instead of passive lectures for a large audience, instructors actively engaged their students in independent inquiry. They expertly asked questions, encouraged lively debates, and expected students to test philosophical concepts against their own life experiences. The educational process was collaborative and continuous, rather than simply the assimilation of fixed doctrines. As evening twilight descended, the observer could see the various philosophical schools gradually concluding their daily activities. Some students returned to their families in the city, integrating the lessons learned into their accustomed home life. Others remained in the peaceful gardens, continuing their profound discussions by lamplight and forging strong friendships that served as a foundation for their lifelong philosophical quest. The most impressive aspect of all these communities was their unwavering emphasis on philosophy as a comprehensive way of life, not merely as an academic discipline. Students were not limited to merely studying theories. They actively applied practical methods aimed at improving the quality of their existence. The ultimate goal was not the accumulation of intellectual information, but the attainment of wisdom, which included the ability to be happy, lead a virtuous life, and benefit others. The wide variety of approaches reflected the Greeks' deep understanding that dissimilar temperaments and life circumstances might require entirely different routes on the path to wisdom. Some individuals organically gravitated toward abstract reasoning, while others preferred applied ethics or empirical scientific observation. Numerous schools offered diverse options, ideally suited for different personality types and their unique interests. As one drifts into thought before sleep in this oasis of ancient wisdom, one could imagine the serenity that flows from possessing a coherent life philosophy, a well-structured system of principles and practical methods that provides reliable guidance in both routine daily life and moments of exceptional challenge. What questions would one wish to explore in these silent groves? And which path to wisdom would resonate most strongly with one's own essence? Nevertheless, despite all their diversity, all schools shared certain fundamental assumptions regarding the paramount importance of reason, the potential for human self-improvement, and the inseparable connection between a deep understanding of the world and a full, prosperous life. They represented different tactics for achieving the same fundamental task, living a worthy and meaningful life. Slowly moving along the northern part of the wall, one could observe the meticulous craftsmanship of construction that allowed it to stand for many generations. At the base lay colossal blocks of local limestone, so skillfully fitted together that binding mortar was superfluous. Above them were smaller stones, laid in perfectly even rows, their surfaces carefully polished and their joints so dense that they effectively diverted rainwater and successfully resisted the cycles of freezing and thawing, which are destructive to careless masonry. Leaving the serene gardens of philosophy, our next and final journey led to one of the most grandiose and pragmatic engineering feats of ancient Athens. At dawn, the traveller stood at the Dipylon gate, watching as labourers began another day of maintaining the long walls, colossal fortifications that connected Athens to its strategically important port of Piraeus, forming an unbroken link to the sea. These grand walls stretched for almost 4 miles through the Attic countryside, and the gaze extended into the distance, seeing them recede into perspective, like 2 gigantic stone embraces, encompassing the road along which Athens's commercial artery continuously pulsed. Erected during the city's peak of power, they were rightly considered one of the most audacious engineering designs of the ancient world, and their chronicle is a narrative of foresight, pragmatism, and persistent stone-by-stone creation. The concept for this massive project arose many decades before its completion, when far-sighted Athenian leaders realized that the steadily increasing power and prosperity of their polis made it an extremely tempting target for adversaries. Unlike Sparta, which relied entirely on the unparalleled martial skill of its citizens for security, Athens chose a different path, deciding to invest in the development of engineering and efficient logistics. Thus, these fortifications embodied a completely different concept of security, based on careful advanced preparation, abundant resources, and deep strategic planning, rather than on exclusive individual heroism. The traveller paused to observe a team of workers engaged in restoring a section where winter storms had weakened some stone blocks. Their work was measured and meticulous. The master stonemason carefully inspected each stone, searching for the slightest cracks or signs of weathering that could undermine its integrity. His assistants, meanwhile, prepared the lime mortar, mixing lime, sand, and water to the required consistency, taking into account the current daily temperature and air humidity. The workers represented a microcosm of Athenian society. Some were full citizens performing their public duty. Others were metics, foreign residents who brought their unique specialized skills to urban projects. Among them were also enslaved people, but even they demonstrated clear pride in their craftsmanship. The walls ultimately belonged to everyone who lived under their protection, and everyone was deeply invested in their impeccable condition. Continuing his movement, the observer involuntarily imagined the grand construction process that gave rise to these impregnable fortifications. Thousands of labourers worked tirelessly for many years, quarrying stone from surrounding hills, transporting it by ox cart to the construction sites, and raising it to the required heights using simple but extremely effective wooden cranes and lever mechanisms. The logistical support for such a large-scale project, including synchronizing material supplies, managing numerous personnel, and distributing funding, required administrative art no less sophisticated than the engineering skill itself. At the moment of its first proposal, the wall project sparked considerable discussion and disagreement. Some Athenians expressed the opinion that such fortifications indicated a lack of faith in the city's own military might. Others voiced concerns about the colossal financial costs and the inevitable disruption to farms and rural estates located along the proposed wall route. However, proponents of the construction argued quite cogently that these walls would provide Athens with unprecedented strategic maneuverability that not even the most outstanding individual military heroism could ensure. Ascending one of the fortress towers, one could survey the vast countryside protected by these monumental fortifications. The long walls served not only to defend Athens itself, they formed a reliable, secure corridor, allowing the city to maintain uninterrupted communication with its powerful fleet and extensive overseas empire, even during periods when enemy armies were ravaging the surrounding territories. It was this unbreakable connection to the sea that radically distinguished Athens from most other Greek polis. The strategic rationale for this system was striking in its elegant simplicity. As long as Athens maintained control of the sea through its powerful fleet, it could freely import food and necessary raw materials even if enemies ravaged the fields of Attica. The long walls guaranteed that these vital imports would safely reach the city, effectively transforming Athens into a kind of island that was connected to the mainland, rather than surrounded by water. The impact of these fortifications on human life extended far beyond purely military aspects. They formed a vast, protected area where inhabitants could live and work peacefully, without constant fear of sudden raids or prolonged sieges. Such reliability stimulated active investment in long-term projects, establishing new olive groves, constructing craft workshops, developing all sorts of enterprises for whose prosperity stability was critically important. From the height of the tower, one could see the continuous daily movement that clearly confirmed the expediency of these grand walls. Merchant caravans tirelessly delivered goods from the port to the bustling city markets. Farmers from protected areas adjacent to the walls brought their produce for sale in the agora. Military supplies moved in both directions as Athens actively supplied its distant naval bases and extensive overseas colonies. Descending from the tower, one spent the rest of the day slowly walking through the neighborhoods that had sprung up and developed in the shadow of these colossal fortifications. These settlements differed significantly in character from the original, ancient parts of Athens. They were more culturally diverse, much more trade-oriented and more deeply integrated into the vast Mediterranean world that pulsed daily through the port of Piraeus. The economic consequences of constructing the walls permeated literally every aspect of Athenian life. Merchants showed readiness to invest in significant warehouse stocks, confident in the inviolability of their goods from raiders. Artisans actively introduced innovative methods and created new products, having access to diverse materials from all corners of the known world. Artists and intellectuals experienced a period of flourishing, as the city's wealth and general security attracted both generous patrons and appreciative connoisseurs of their work. Children romped in the narrow streets, their games often including imitations of battles and sieges, inspired by the mighty fortifications that dominated the surrounding landscape. For these young inhabitants, the walls were nothing more than an integral part of the natural world order, as immutable and reliable as the ancient hills or the boundless sea. They were unable to imagine their city without this protection, just as previous generations could not have conceived that such a defense would ever be needed. The observer also noted how the walls themselves, organically woven into the daily existence of the city. Certain sections of these fortifications served as windbreaks for market squares, reliable shelters for craft workshops, and even sturdy foundations for residential buildings. What was initially conceived as a purely military architectural structure gradually transformed into an integral part of the urban infrastructure, performing multiple functions and supporting both civilian and defensive activities. As evening descended, the observer once again found himself at the Dapolon Gate, watching the last travellers of the day pass through the impressive archways. The guards, meticulously checking documents and collecting customs duties, embodied the complex administrative systems that made the existence of these grand walls possible. Without reliably protected borders, such organized governance and state functioning would simply be inconceivable. Maintaining the walls in proper condition guaranteed continuous employment for numerous skilled specialists and simultaneously stimulated the development of technical innovations. Engineers constantly sought original approaches to lifting massive stone blocks, improving construction technologies. Chemists, in turn, actively experimented with various compounds designed to effectively resist the destructive effects of atmospheric phenomena and erosion. And architects tirelessly developed projects to improve fortifications, from gates and watchtowers to complex drainage systems ensuring their longevity. The observer spends his final hour taking a leisurely stroll along the outer perimeter of these grandiose fortifications. As the soft twilight gradually gives way to deep night, torchlights begin to flicker and glow in the watchtowers. Muffled voices of the guards can be heard, whose task is to maintain vigilant watch during the dark hours. Their alertness is a routine, well-established procedure rather than a reaction to a sudden threat. The walls provide such a high degree of protection that dramatic and dangerous clashes are actually extremely rare. These long walls are rightly considered an outstanding phenomenon in the annals of human civilization. They represent the triumphant realization of a far-sighted strategic vision, embodied in practical engineering solutions, and also serve as a testament to society's unwavering commitment to allocating colossal resources and labour efforts necessary to maintain such an ambitious project for many generations. Their existence clearly demonstrates how a society can invest in its own long-term security and prosperity, relying on patient, painstaking and often unseen labour. Among other things, the walls vividly embody Athens' unique philosophy in international relations. Instead of primarily relying on fragile alliances or exacting tribute from weaker neighbours, Athens chose to invest significant resources in developing fundamental infrastructure that, in turn, expanded its own internal potential. These fortifications, operating in tandem with the powerful fleet they reliably protect, provide the city with a wide range of opportunities and tactical maneuverability unavailable through purely coercive military methods alone. The walls serve as a clear testament that civilization is often inextricably linked to developed infrastructure, to those humble yet vital practical projects that lay the unshakable foundations for long-term human flourishing and societal well-being. Behind every golden age there are always tireless engineers, far-sighted administrators and diligent workers who tirelessly erect and maintain the complex systems that enable such grand achievements. However, the most striking aspect of these walls is their ability to transform the very nature of a city, allowing it to become a beacon of culture, philosophy and democracy, shielded by the quiet, constant work of its people.